The Watcher is a unique campaign for sure. A journey like no other, as they literally say. One of its unique features is the lack of any way to read data pearls. And, of course, the lack of any data pearls themselves where we're going. But this isn't a case of a lack of lore. This is a challenge. We've had the knowledge of the world directly read to us by the most intelligent of beings. Now, we have everything we need to connect the drops ourselves. In the journey of the Watcher, one thing becomes evident before any other thing does. Something is going on with the rot. Something unusual, something mysterious, something unlike anything we've seen in all the other iterations of Rainworld. Something you might even call entirely unprecedented based on what we knew before. The Watcher, exploring a land unfamiliar to it, despite the comparatively quite adept wit and skill, finds things that are also unfamiliar to the player. Purple immobile rot growths sprouting in seemingly random rooms, blocking any and all passage to the iterators of the local grounds, and for that matter most of the map. The immediate thought is usually, oh no, what has Pebbles possibly done? What's happened to him? And also the occasional, what in the world does this mean for the timeline? And of course, since they block off these paths, the question seemingly remains unanswered. But looking a slight bit closer, both of these immediate questions sort of answer themselves. The answer being, nothing. The lands are as they appeared for every slugcat in the base game, and every patch of rot appears entirely isolated, in small rooms, few and far between, with no indication that they came from 5 Pebbles at all, especially with how they're purple instead of the familiar blue. Instead, the growths seem to have come into being wherever our then mysterious Echo friend interacted with reality. Echo rot. But what does that mean? You may then think. Didn't 5 Pebbles create the rot? Hasn't every instance of it seen in these entire lands been the result of his tally of bad luck? Well, even ignoring Hunter, there's a certain line of dialogue that surrounding iterators say about 5 Pebbles when they send overseers to check on the state of his can after the brink of his disaster. He's got the rot. Very badly. Big cysts have become mobile and are scattering down the west and middle legs. That wording, not only does it suggest it's not a new thing, but also that it's a particularly known affliction, at least among iterators, if not the people that built them. But what does that then mean? That the rot is something that extends beyond 5 Pebbles, something that's known, significant enough to be relatively common knowledge among the remaining intelligent life in this world, as common knowledge as would be the concept of cancer itself. And yet, despite how much the rot behaves like cancer, the word cancer has never ever been seen anywhere in Rainworld, has it? Well, here's the theory. That the rot isn't just like cancer. It is cancer. As in, there's a fundamental force at play that results in any kind of cancer simply becoming the rot. A fundamental force that's cosmically related to the void itself. The cycle. All life, bound, immortal in the world, be it through the reincarnation of one's mind into a vessel later in time, or the resetting of one's body in a place earlier in time. The void, the likely cause. Say that it goes something like this. When a lifeform dies in the physical realm, a silent snapshot of their qualia spawns into non-being, and begins a great and long journey downward. Swimming with purpose, yet blind and brainless to the world around it, phasing through matter as if it doesn't exist, unthinkingly swimming down to the void sea as we observe them to do. When it meets with the void, it splits from reality, not ascending, but cycling, and begins another incredibly long journey down from the heavens, like how the dust silently rains down to the surface too. And at the end of this journey, it finds its own body, resting, peaceful. In this strand, it never died in the first place. It isn't even as far along in time as was the so-called predecessor, yet it was nonetheless drawn back here because memory traps its cell. Worldly attachments, a will to live. This creature had things to do, places to see. It can't do those things or see those places if it doesn't exist. Circumstance killed the cat, but worldly attachment brought it back. Back in time and space, back when and where. And yet, of course, this happens to every creature. Every creature in the whole world. You might think that one lifeform resetting its timeline nullifies the last, but for it to be occurring for every creature, each and every of the billions of instances of reality simply must be no less real than the last, all separate from the perspective of each lifeform, yet fundamentally part of the same one timeline, the entire world locked in a quantum state. Perhaps we can extrapolate further the second option too, to be transported to the future and experience a continuing world. After all, time must move forward in this world. All these grand and imposing structures would never see the light of day if every life form was only subjected to endless resetting. So, perhaps, when something dies and it feels accomplished and content with its life, that's when it gets to move on to a new one. That's when the spawn of its qualia hits the void and instead fragments into the future, instead of cycling into the past. But of course, a cycle of reincarnation is still a cycle, and the people of this world didn't appreciate either option after so much time and toil. They wanted a life they could truly control, a world without a cycle, where their efforts are not reset due to circumstance, and where their qualia isn't incessantly brought back to a world they've already seen. They've mastered this world. They tell themselves they've seen everything. Why should they tolerate a reality infinitely longer when it throws them around like this? They wished to leave the world behind, and go to a new one where they can exist without a cycle. But the void doesn't give offerings. Not like this. They found wall after wall, and despite it all, even their greatest achievement was a point of no return. And an inconsistent one at that. For despite how entering the void with your own physical body is a step up from entering it as a void spawn, you'll still become a type of ghost anyway. One that's even more trapped than void spawn are. A cycle successfully broken, but stuck in the doorframe, unable to do anything but watch. Pretty much everyone agreed that becoming an echo was a worse alternative, but at least the new phenomena gave them more ideas and philosophy about the whole thing. They determined that indeed, the void cycle is dependent on attachment to the plane, and that echoes are stuck because of this, like a void spawn that's unable to reset or reincarnate, unable to pair with their now non-existent old body nor a new one, only watching environments that relate to their attachments, rather than being able to interact with those environments in any meaningful way. It seemed impossible, or at least incredibly difficult to truly break the cycle, and now they understood why. All creatures have attachments: aggression, reproduction, connection, consumption, the will to live. Sure, it's possible, even if harrowing and miserable, to achieve a lack of these things, but only because they were intelligent enough to figure out how it works, or at least able to build an understanding close enough. What natural creature could possibly truly ascend? The cycle, for all of its benefits, is a form of torture. Infinite lives that will inevitably be full of the same struggles and pains, despite their occasional upsides. No end, no escape. And yet, struggle in of itself is another thing that attaches a creature to life. It's the effort that binds you, and the effort made to ascend is no different. The analogy was made that the world is an unfortunate mess, like a knot. The nature of its existence is the fact that the parts are locking each other, none able to spring free. And then it's a fishing net, because the more we struggle and squirm, the more entangled we become. Only the limp body of the jellyfish cannot be captured in the net, so we should try to be like the jellyfish, because the jellyfish doesn't try. Ironic it was that the only things that could easily ascend would be the simplest of creatures, creatures that would never know of the wider world, never know of the void, and thus ironically more in tune with the void because of that, close to the state of being that is ascension, because it thinks and acts oh so little. But do you know what's even closer? What thinks even less than a jellyfish does? The most fundamental form of organic life possible, that which consumes but doesn't know why, that which grows but doesn't know how, doesn't know anything, bereft of any purpose, be it heart or brain or bone, unlinked to any kind of will, instinctive or not, and yet is prevalent all the way from the earliest days of organic life emerging from chemicals and primordial soup to now and for as long as life exists. Cancer. Rot. Alive, but erroneous, unconnected, unattached to anything. So in tune with the state of being that is the void's ascension, that despite lacking the ability to comprehend anything, it may as well already be ascended. A state of mindless zen that produces no qualia, and no qualia means that if rot dies, there simply would be no void spawn to speak of. Not produced by the rot itself, for sure. But perhaps that's the thing. Perhaps cancer, due to being a living entity with no qualia to speak of, causes some manner of feedback loop in the void, and that in the event a creature hosts some form of cancer in its body, that cancer will become more and more powerful, more rot, each time the creature dies and cycles back. Because while the qualia of the creature's nervous system is updated by the reality of its previous life, The cancer in its body is only updated by the raw void, exposed to a state of ascension. The more times it experiences this cycle, the benign cysts begin to naturally develop X marks on their surfaces, a feature seen growing naturally elsewhere only in the glowing wheel flowers, the only karma symbol not fabricated by the civilizations around us, the only one that occurs naturally entirely on its own. 4 lines intersecting, directing to a central point, a core, perhaps the singularity of the void, where the cycle meets its end. That said, though, the rot is never invincible, say. Even if it's animated by the void and immune to the cycle as we know it, it can still die, physically. It still decays. Its matter remains mortal. Even without Downpour's showcase of the progression of time, the rot can still be seen withering. Five Pebbles' early attempts to rid himself of his corruption didn't work, sure, but the rot that was dumped into his garbage wastes was forced to adapt to its new environment. Exposed to dirty garbage water and a distinct lack of fully functional biocomputer complexes, it lost the vibrant electric blue color that it inherited from Pebbles' body, and gained a dirty greenish brown. And it also just became physically weaker. They're smaller, they collapse onto the ground any time they consume anything. Their rampant growth over the walls is near silenced. Quite the contrast to the strain of it that remained in Five Pebbles, which simply continued to grow and consume without limit, a product of the effectively infinite resources that it would have for a very, very long time. But a long time is not forever. A lack of resources means a lack of continuation, and its nature as animated cancer means it doesn't really evolve or adapt in any way beyond being composed of what it consumes. But, to be fair, regular organisms aren't quite immortal either. The cycle makes entities immortal in qualia, in mind, not body. Observe the world from a purely matter perspective, and you'd find it behaves pretty much exactly how you'd expect. At least, for all the parts where the void isn't physically present. Creatures live and die, their mass is recycled into the mass of other life forms. Evolution probably functions exactly as you'd think it would. The main difference simply being that creatures are technically given the opportunity to experience their evolution firsthand through their infinite lives. Though, it probably still would take a while. The average creature likely wouldn't remember or care. So, what then? Doesn't immunity to the cycle make the rot less immortal than other life forms? Wouldn't this technically make it less dangerous on the cosmic scale? Well, not quite. We see firsthand later in the Watcher campaign the full might of the rot. The entire world seemingly being consumed, the rot spread through every last organism like the strongest and most insurmountable organic virus you could think of. But how is this possible? We've not seen it infect creatures before, only consuming mass and idly growing until its host of resources dies out, like, well, cancer. So, what exactly is going on here? Well, we could say that in place of being part of the cycle, the rot gets something else. It's clear that the Watcher's journey reaches places separated by vast distances and times, but we can say there's a third medium which the Watcher's traveling through, not just here and there in space, not just back and forth in time, but to and fro in rot. Time, space, and rot. 3 cosmic directions, or perhaps you could call it fringe, or misalignment, or even hell, as I called it the actual regions of it in my playthrough, though the term is loose. Where organic life cycles through the void spawn, the rot is subjected to an immortal reflection of reality, one where the only thing that exists is rot, where even the slightest bit of cancer in their prime world is reflected into a ghost of life's cosmic disease, a dimension on the edge of reality as we know it, where physics gives way to these cosmic forces unbound, despite how it too is directly connected to the world we know, both affecting each other. In terms of how it affects the prime world, well, perhaps we could say it's basically the physical representation of the force I described earlier, that feedback loop, the one that animates the cancer into rot in the first place. As for how the prime world affects these places, though, we can see it in the exact nature of the local fringe. The areas in Pebbles grounds are overgrown, living, writhing, a place of pure anarchy, where living ecosystems exist entangled into this reflection of themselves, everything still trying to eat everything else. But the state of the regions you corrupt through portal travel doesn't approach nearly the level of cosmic rot that exists around Five Pebbles, likely simply because of the proximity these locations have to Five Pebbles in the Prime World, or more accurately his unfortunate development, which we can see what the Fringe's reflection of that materialized into. A reality of seemingly endless broken geometry, where all of Pebble's matter seems suspended in animation. None of his original body appears active, even the gravity disruptors are offline, and yet it's all zero-G anyway, like physics just couldn't handle it and left. The only moving thing here is this grand listener, this void worm adjacent coalescence of pure rot. Unlike how the other rot worlds have hundreds of rot creatures running around, here it's this and only this. Likely because here it's the unique case of the entire region only having one cancerous organism in its prime world counterpart. 5 Pebbles. Really, in that sense, this thing could be like the Fringe's reflection of Pebbles himself, having shed the body like a cocoon, a ghost of his creation that haunts him from the purge of its dimension for as long as he remains intact, and maybe even infinitely after that, a stain on the fabric of reality. In these rot realities, it's not the rot that's infectious. Every mutated lifeform you see is the product of the rot that already existed in their body. Weak in our reality, sure, but here, this is simply what they've always been. Always been. Perhaps literally, too. Space seems pretty out of whack in these places. Time may simply not work in most of them either. The life here experiencing an immortality quite different from the cycle we know. Even if these rot dimensions depend on the state of time in the prime world, time perhaps cannot truly be experienced when you're actually in them. With all this in mind, when the world around us corrupts in the Watcher campaign, when we go too far, and everything gives way to a sea of lumps due to shifting through portal ripples so much, it's not us being so far in the future that the rot has consumed all, it's not even the rot infecting things, but rather the Watcher bringing itself, and possibly the local world, closer and closer to the fringe, the edge of reality. If this is all the case, though, at least the rot isn't really going to consume the whole world. Or is it? In our world, intelligence in organisms is incredibly rare, or at least intelligence of a civilization level, either lacking this or that, or just not being given the situation that encourages high brain power. In Rainworld, though, this may not be as much the case. Consider how I described the void spawn to work from earlier, or even consider just how the cycle is described, both in its reset and reincarnation versions, the implications of it. Every time a void spawn cycles, a creature becomes the slightest bit more knowledgeable. Life is given the opportunity to experiment without meeting true death, and generations inherit the knowledge of their ancestors directly. Perhaps due to this, intelligence is just that bit easier to emerge in this world. And it's not like there's nothing to show for it either. In the modern era, we have both scavengers and slugcats, 2 potential civilization species, which is more than one. Both of which have significant tool use, a potential to become something greater with time, assuming they don't kill each other and actually work together. But more than that. It's somewhat implied that the old temples and the guardians in them are at least somewhat created by another grand civilization, something that came far before the modern benefactors, which are still ancient to us, the slugcat, in those modern times. Whether the benefactors share them as ancestors, or simply took their designs for some stuff elsewhere, if they're not related, then that's the case of 2 entire full-blown civilizations, which again is more than one. Downpour even brings up the idea that there could have been tens, perhaps thousands of these civilizations. Not that even the ancients would know, but that's the thing, there wouldn't be much of a way to know. The remnants of artificial structures only last so long on geological timescales, and probably last even less long under the forces at play in Rainworld, with the dust cycle and everything. All that aside, though, I say this to say that the rot might experience something similar. A buildup of its presence over time due to the circumstances of the material world. If the state of the fringe is even loosely dependent on the current state of the prime world in both space and time, and if the rot is immortal in the reflection it creates, then, logically, the more creatures get cancer, the more infested the fringe becomes. A world formed out of corpses. Honestly, somewhat like an afterlife, except instead of you going there, your cancer does. What effect this would inversely have on the prime world, I have no idea. Maybe it's easier to get cancer as time goes on. Hard to say. I will say, though, that if this is all the case, the benefactors unknowingly expedited this cosmic force by a lot by building the iterators. See, the rot would have existed before the iterators were around, but it would have been to scale, as in to scale of their host bodies. They'd be no bigger than clumps of actual cancerous tissue. they'd likely never even leave their host bodies. The creature would just die of cancer like normal, and no one would know the slightest thing about the rot until someone invents an X-ray. Iterator rot, though? If an iterator gets cancer, which, statistically speaking, likely happened a few times before 5 Pebbles, its rot is proportional to the megastructure, which is practically a cosmic horror thing in of itself. Iterator rot is big enough to actually consume entire animals, especially if it becomes fully animated and active. This form of rot is probably the closest the world has ever seen to the cosmic rot, and thus likely single-handedly exacerbates the state of the fringe on the entire world, which, again, who knows what that actually does to the world? All in all, probably very little. Even if it does have an effect, it'd likely take millions, if not billions of years to actually bring the state of the world into what the fringe currently looks like. Cosmic forces aren't exactly fast, after all. Recall that the material cycle of dust still requires the rock to work its way all the way down the sediments before it meets world's end. But anyway, let's just hope the world never sees physical rot of this scale again. And also that the next civilization that comes along doesn't make an even bigger biological supercomputer and bring this thing into the material world.